Don't get stuck being sticky.
Yay!
All right.
All right.
Workbench.
Workbench, yeah.
I was going to skip it, but you were excited about what we're going to talk about
I am
today.
excited because it's been a nemesis this week. So,
Yes.
yeah.
What we're going to talk about today is, we talked about bobbins last week.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about needles today.
Yeah. What
What size needle do you use?
Depends on the project.
Yes.
We use 14 no matter what.
I'm a universal 90-14 for everything.
See? Oh my gosh.
But that's not the right answer. I'm the
No,
first to
it's
admit it.
not the right answer. It's not the right answer.
But I just want to show people the difference right here.
Okay.
See, I've even planned. Look at this. If we zoom in, see those needles there?
Get closer. Get closer. Okay. Are those both 14s?
Nope. One of those is 110-18,
Oh.
and the other is a 90-14. Now, these are actually long arm needles, but if you look at them closely, you see the difference in the size of the eye and the thickness of the needle. What's that?
This is what you're supposed to use.
Well, yeah, but this is a long arm needle. I wanted people to see the difference because we're going to talk about what you run into.
I want you to show them the difference between this needle and the 14s that you tell people they can
Well, they
use.
won't be able to see it like we just did. Anyway.
Show them.
Okay, fine. We'll put this on there because I can tell you that.
She won't let it go.
I won't let it go.
But it's going to look even worse because I'm using like these ginormous nails that you put in a long arm machine.
But they are ginormous on the end.
So yeah,
Yeah.
see that little one.
Okay, so show us a 14 versus an 11. Mm-hmm.
Well,
And look at the points.
The 14 is the one on the 18 is the one in the middle. The 14 is on one end, and the tiny 11 is on the other.
And look at the difference in the points.
Yes, the points are a little bit different. You also got a different size. The gauge of the needle itself is thicker, and the eye is also smaller. So these are there's a few.
So what do you want going through your embroidery, ladies?
Not the big hole. I can help it.
Okay. I was waiting for it, but somebody's.
I'm typing. I'm sorry.
Um,
I'm not multitasking.
We want the 11, the small
Now
pointy
the reason,
one.
yeah, the reason I'm bringing this up as a workbench tech tip type thing is it got nothing to do. I mean, quality is important, but one of the things I don't have it back here that you run into is skip stitches. If your machine is starting to skip stitches, first thing is like, oh my gosh, my timing's out. Oh, it's the end of the world. No. 9 times out of 10, if you're skipping stitches, it's because your needle is too small. Yes, that's what she said, Danny.
I didn't even get a chance.
But your needle is too small because what happens is you saw how the difference in thickness on those needles. Smaller needles bend more. The way sewing machines work, there's what they call deflection in the needle. It's built into the mechanics of the machine. All needles are going to bend a little bit. And so the thinner needles bend more. So what will happen is if your needle's too thin and you're going through thicker material, it's going to bend too far off of the bobbin hook and you're going to get skip stitches. That's why I, as a very lazy quilter, do a 90-14 for everything because I never have to think about what I'm putting it in. Now, 9 times out of 10, a 75-11 is going to work just fine unless you move.
No, it's going to work better.
Unless you're going through a thicker material.
Well,
Thicker
I'm talking about cotton.
Yes.
Yeah.
But what happens when you're going through like 4 layers of cotton?
That's different. That's different.
Yeah.
I'm not embroidering through.
90-14.
Yes.
I'm not embroidering through.
But that's
if I'm embroidering jeans, I'm using the 14.
yes. But
Yeah.
that's one of the big considerations is you're going to get skip stitches if your needle's too small. Now the downside to the thicker needle is it makes a bigger hole.
It makes gigantic holes.
So in cotton, it's not. I know you're going to get mad at me for saying this.
Yep.
I'm not. It's not an awful big deal because the way needles work in cotton, I'm gonna get there. It's not like vinyl where you're punching a hole through it. Most of the time, needles are going through the weave. No, you're cutting the weave. You're cutting the weave in cotton.
I'm not even listening.
But when you're
I'm
doing,
leaving you on your own
when you're
island right
working
now.
on like vinyl or things that you're actually gonna punch a hole through, you definitely want to use the smallest needle you can find because that hole, once it's punched, is there to stay. Some materials are actually going between the weave and not actually cutting the weave, so the hole size, throw it in the dryer and it shrinks. And I know Becky doesn't want to hear that. The other consideration, like I said, the big thing is if you're getting skip stitches, go up a needle size. The other reason you would want to go up in needle size is the size of your thread. Because thicker, if you noticed when we were showing needles, bigger needles have bigger eyes. Bigger eyes mean bigger thread. I was going to say bigger holes, bigger
Bigger
thread,
eyes, yeah, I get
but you
that.
have a bigger eye of the needle, so you can get thicker thread through. So what you're going to run into is 7511 is kind of the default embroidery needle. Also, 40 weight thread is the default embroidery thread. If you try to go to, say, a thicker thread, say up to like a 12 weight or even like a Tex 30, you may start getting shredded thread in a 7511 because it's too big for that needle.
True.
So you want to take that into account as well when you're selecting needle size. Base it also, take into account the thread. Those are the two big things to keep in mind from a tech standpoint on the needles. Now, the fancy sewing stuff, I'm going to let Becky speak to that because...
No, I really think, oh, yes?
Jean wants to know what about sharps or balls?
That gets into the material.
fabric.
Yeah, the fabric, the kind of material. You always want to use...
Cotton, sharp.
Yes, well, yes. Sharps,
More often than not, I'm using a sharp.
yeah, I've heard
Not a
different...
universal,
Yeah.
not a ball.
I've heard both ways on cotton. And I know that it's heresy to say that.
It is.
But cotton, because it's so simple to work with, I think there's a lot of kind of wiggle room there. There are some things like, for example, if you're using like vinyl, what would you use on vinyl?
I would not use an 11. If I'm sewing, I'm going to go up to a 12, but I'd still use a sharp.
Sure, yes, because on vinyl,
I typically use a sharp.
on vinyl, you're
Don't use universals or balls unless I'm into a stretchy knit or something.
Yeah.
And,
yeah, like on vinyl, anything you're gonna punch a hole through, like punch a hole through, you want a sharp. That because a sharp is designed to punch holes. A ball and to some extent a universal is more designed to go between the weave and the fabric. It's not designed to actually cut a hole. So that's that's the technical side of it. So based on your material, if you understand knits for sure, you want a ball, as they pointed out in the chat. You definitely want a ballpoint on knits.
Yeah.
Because a sharp, you don't want to, it's going to get caught and make a mess.
I want to use the smallest, sharpest needle I can for the job
Yes.
I'm doing when it comes to quilting or embroidery.
And I think that's a very good rule of thumb. Smallest, sharpest needle you can get. But like I said, from a tech standpoint, skip stitches and thread size are going to mandate what size needle you should use.
Plus the other problem I had once with a brother machine.
Oh, that's going to bring me to my other point I wanted to talk about.
Okay, well, I had a needle in that was bigger than I normally use, and I called Brent and I said, this stupid thing, every time I trim and I go to start up, it gets unthreaded. It doesn't stay in the needle. And I said, so now I can't even use that trim feature because it keeps coming out of my needle. And he said to me, well, it might be your needle size.
Yep, a top stitch needle is famous for this because top stitch needles
And
actually
it was indeed the needle.
Yes. A top stitch needle especially has a ginormous eye on it. And a lot of times in the thread cutters, it just pulls it right out when you cut
Pulled it right out, and I was using the bottom line thread,
Yeah,
which is really thin.
Yeah, so
And I'm thinking there's something wrong with my machine, and
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with the machine. It was the needle that was in the machine that I believe you put in the machine. So
yes, yeah, but probably.
once I switched it to my 11,
And that brings to another point that we were talking about earlier that we'll discuss here real quick is organs versus normal needles.
oh yes,
There is a difference. An organ needle is, I believe, a millimeter or half a millimeter longer. It is physically a different needle. And according to legend,
it's not legend. It's not legend.
all Japanese machines,
Including brothers.
including Brother, Baby Locks, and Genomis, are all calibrated on organ needles. They're actually designed to run on organ needles. Now, this really doesn't mean much, and I'm going to get myself in trouble again for saying this. On a regular sewing machine, you've got a zigzag, and so if you have a zigzag on your machine, the timing is ballparked. You have you have a window where the timing can be, and it'll work because when you have a zigzag, the needle position moves, which in effect changes your timing. So just because it's calibrated to an organ needle doesn't mean it has to have an organ needle, because you've got a little bit of wiggle room in there because of the zigzag. On a straight stitch machine, which will also include an embroidery only machine, timing, you can dial that in a lot more because the needle's only coming down in one spot. The only time I've run into it twice, where I needed an organ needle for the machine to run properly. Both times they were embroidery only machines, because the timing on an embroidery only machine, it's a straight stitch only machine, so your timing can be a lot more exact.
Right.
So organ needles will make a difference on a straight stitch machine or a embroidery only machine, because it's essentially a straight stitch machine. And then we'll be stocking them, because Becky's like, why don't you stock them?
Yeah, I've had it, people. I've had it.
But
I have to buy organ needles elsewhere. It's ridiculous. He's a brother dealer. Sell the darn organ needles.
Good point.
So he's bringing the organ needles in.
Yay! Yes, Danny.
Jean would like to know what you use Universal on.
I use Universal on everything. I mean,
That's why it's called Universal.
hence the name Universal.
Hence the-
It just works for
Yeah.
everything.
Right.
It does everything all right, but nothing perfect.
really good.
Yeah,
So I would not have it in my repertoire.
yeah, and see, that's the difference. See, there's people that buy like all the different types of needles and change them on their projects, and then there's other people like myself
That buys Universal
that buys
14.
Universals and use it for everything. Now, as you get better,
There's an audience question.
No.
Yes, our live
we
studio-
do.
yeah.
Oh.
as you up your sewing game, I'm sure that you'll get to the
Brenda's
different.
going, I use Universal 14s for everything.
You know, are you familiar with Anita Good?
Anita Good Design.
Okay.
Yeah.
In their magazine, they had an article on needles,
Mm-hmm.
and all of their samples and everything is done on a 14 universal.
Okay.
there's other
After
stitch outs,
I
yeah.
read that, I started using 14 universals.
Okay.
That's
Brenda's
good enough-
saying
That's good enough for me.
Universal 14 is promoted by Anita Good Design, therefore
Well, they
it's good
d-
enough for her. And I'm going to tell you that this past week I've done a lot of experimenting with embroidery and needles, and the answer is you're wrong.
Well, you have to. I read that article that they use Universal 14s for all their stitch outs. But you have to keep in mind that there's two. When they're talking about, they're testing stitch outs. They just want to make sure that the digitizing is right and it stitches out properly. That's not to say that it's the optimal needle for the project, because that needle is going to change based on what you're using for a backing material, what kind of thread you're using. But a 9014 Universal is a good baseline needle. But when you're taking it to another level, like I said,
Yeah, and you don't press your seams either.
I know,
So
but-
let's move on.
I do some of this stuff because I feel bad. I'm like, Becky said I should do this, so I should start doing it.
Okay.
Okay.
So, organ needles, here we come.
Yes, we will
right?
be getting
You
organ
still
needles
have
in.
your other needles.
Yes, because the other thing is marketing. A lot of people understand from a store standpoint is marketing. Like
Well, I'll push
Orifil thread.
organ
Orifil thread. We carry Orifil thread because people ask for Orifil
Orifil
thread by
thread.
name.
Yeah.
People ask for needles by name. They ask for Schmetz needles. So I
Yeah.
carry Schmetz needle.
Right.
Nobody comes in and says, "Do you have organ needles?"
Well, that's because we haven't.
yeah. Well,
educated
I
them
blame
on it.
Organ because they haven't.
Well,
Are those the ones that come with our machine?
Yeah, it'll come.
they
have-
do
yeah,
come with your
yeah.
machine.
So, yeah, we
Yes, yes, and you just got somebody who says we need better needles for Kimberbell.
Yes, we do.
Start the revolution.
That is what started my hunt on the needles this week. Was a Kimberbell design. Okay,
Oh,
all right.
Jean's onto something. Jean has a great tip. Now that we have more than one person using our machines, I have a blackboard clothespin that I write the size of the needle in the machine. It is on something near the machine. Nice.
Machine, the needle in the machine.
So she basically just has a note near the machine of what's in it for a needle.
Oh,
That's a good
I can
idea.
keep track of switching it all the time.
I would just make sure I had the needle I want in the machine
Yes.
before I sat
Well, that's
down.
good.
But that's a good idea,
Okay.
Jean.
So anyway,
Good
that's
idea.
that was my that was my workbench for the night. That we've stirred all sorts of controversy.
Okay, yeah.